my goodness. Oh, it's been such a crazy. It's been crazy. It's a crazy evening. It's been insane. Oh my God. It's crazy. It's the first Wednesday night, war night, and we're going to be talking all about it now, right now on HIAC Talk Radio. There's a rumor that our website is coming back, and that means our iTunes and our it's not iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts are coming back. All that and more discussion here on HIAC Talk Radio. I am the above average comedian Dan Calachico. With me as always, Craig Lagans. Before we get to Wrestling Historian, the segment you all are here for. The first ever episode of AEW Dynamite has aired. The first head-to-head episode of NXT has aired. And let's get right down to it. I'll start with AEW Dynamite. It was a good show. It wasn't groundbreaking. It wasn't amazing. It wasn't the best thing I've ever seen ever on television. However, it was a fun show. Rio won the first ever AEW women's title. And let me just say this. And I'm not just saying this because the women's title is the AEW women's title is that is a missed opportunity. That belt is so small and weak. It's a stupid belt. Here, ladies, here's your belt. That's stupid. And I have a feeling that Nyla Rose is going to be a world champion before the year is over, or very soon, right after the year has switched to the 20. So I'm not worried about that, but that match was incredible. John Moxley has returned. Jack Hager, as they are calling him now, has debuted for AEW in a big, huge WCW Nitro-like ending where the Elite were destroyed by whatever that faction with Jericho is called. I will say this. My big takeaway, other than the individual performances from the wrestlers in the ring, it was so refreshing to hear. I say refreshing because people are like, you old man. I'm like, I get it. Trust me. It was so good to hear JR and Tony Schiavone on commentary again. Schiavone doesn't sound like he's missed a beat. He was right up on it again. And he's been doing MLW. I just remembered that we were given an assignment from a wrestling fan to watch an old episode of SmackDown and review it, and I've forgotten. Sorry, it's a pop-up thought. We'll do that next week. I'll explain off air. Sorry, Craig. MLW, he's been doing for around a year with Cornette off and on, and that sounded great. But the live TV, Tony Schiavone was back again. Excalibur needs to shut up. And I'm going to say no disrespect. Stop talking. Whoever's making him, because it's not Excalibur's fault, because there's producing. Whoever's making Excalibur talk over Tony and JR every chance he gets, stop it. Excalibur is fine. I don't agree with Cornette, them saying that he doesn't belong there and why does he wear a mask. I mean, who cares? He's a commentator. He used to be a wrestler. There, that's the story. He interrupted JR and Tony like 4 times in the first hour. Stop it. Other than that, it was a good show. I enjoyed it. Moxley putting Kenny Omega through a glass table. And good matches. Again, it wasn't groundbreaking. It was exciting. It's exciting to see that this war has started. I virtually ignored social media to the point where if it's somebody I didn't follow, I didn't bother respond. I don't care about the comparisons in that way. I don't care what social media has to say. And I'm real glad social media was not around when the Monday Night Wars was happening. I've yet to watch NXT because tonight I wanted just to watch the premiere of Dynamite. I will be flipping back and forth every Wednesday, which will be hard because we do the show. So we'll see how that goes. Multi-view on PlayStation View is going to be a godsend for the Wednesday Night Wars. I'll tell you that. However, you, sir, did flip back and forth, but your main emphasis was on NXT. And I have no doubt in my mind that show wasn't anything short of a great show. And there was an overrun. It just ended right before we started, and we hit record. So how did NXT go? And then your thoughts on the whole thing, them going head to head, like I just said.
First of all, them going head to head reminded me. You mentioned JR and Tony Schiavone, and a couple of people on social media said, "Wow, this harkens back to my childhood." JR and Tony Schiavone on commentary is amazing. This harkened back to my adulthood with WCW and WWE going head to head. I watched NXT. Um, Instead of AEW, I switched back and forth, but I started on NXT because they had the NXT Heavyweight Championship as the first match out of the gate. Matt Riddle versus Adam Cole, baby. Um, Mostly because NXT has had a head start. They already had already debuted on USA last week when we talked about that on this very podcast. But the opening match was a heavyweight championship match. Adam Cole Baby has been doing media all over the country. He was on our favorite radio show, the Preston Steve Show, yesterday. He sounded great. He was on the new WWE online show called The Bump, which was trending worldwide earlier this morning from 10 to 11. He was on with Seth Rollins, and they both were talking about how they would love to wrestle each other, and how Seth and Adam Cole Baby's careers have kind of paralleled. They both started in this. They wrestled in the same indie promotions, not at the same time. They both wrestled in NXT, not at the same time, and they both were champion. And both have, surprisingly, both had disdain for Matt Riddle. Seth Rollins is very vocal about his dislike of Matt Riddle, uh, telling him he sucks and telling him to put some shoes on, and so he's and Seth Rollins came right out and said, I'm Team Baby all the way." Tonight in his match against Matt Riddle. First match out of the gate, absolutely stunning. Both of them were incredible. One thing I did notice, Dan, and I said this before we went on the air, it might be because of the difference in venues. Full Sail University is obviously not as big as the where AEW was taped, but man, was it loud there. And I guess my only drawback with the NXT crowd, I know they're very vocal, they're very passionate, but it's like a chant fest. It's like every 2 seconds there's another chant breaking out. When I switched over to AEW, just by comparison, it was very quiet. Not to say that the crowd wasn't into it, but
Yeah. No, it seemed fine to me. There were moments where it was a bit quieter, and like I'll have to take your word for it because I did not see the NXT show yet, and I will do that after we record here. It was a good crowd. It was a good crowd. DC, and I don't mean this as they're not interested. DC is a little quieter, but the pops were very loud in the ring. Sounded like a WCW ring. It was a good. I was actually very impressed because I told you I don't care about social media, but one of the things I saw, and this is the reason I don't care, everybody was bitching about the production and all the miscues. It was fairly seamless for Dynamite, and I do encourage you to watch it uninterrupted at some point for the next episode, just to get a feel for it, because I thought it was very well produced. The segues into the commercial were very well done. Michael Cole, WWE, does this thing where, and we'll be right back after this, and there's this long, awkward, sometimes pause before the commercial starts. Jim Ross was very good at it. And it was loud, but yeah, Full Sail being like the size of ECW Arena, it's going to seem like 1,000 people or like 10, 20 every time.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned some returns on AEW, and I'm watching it right now, muted. Watching AEW. I'm in the Cody Rhodes match and Sammy Guevara. Very good match. Adam Cole and Matt Riddle was excellent, exceptional. The Shayna Baszler match, women's match, exceptional, so good. And it ended with the tag team match, the Street Profits against the Undisputed Era, the tag team champions. It overlapped, and it went amazing. Would you like to, since you didn't see NXT, you mentioned the people that showed up on AEW's premiere show, John Moxley, Jack Hager. Would you like to know who showed up at NXT?
I do know because my good friend Aaron Galvan out of Fresno, California, texted me about Finn Balor. I was like, dude, come on. Yeah, go ahead, man.
Well, Finn Balor showed up at the end of after Adam Cole retained the NXT Heavyweight Championship over Matt Riddle. Finn Balor showed up to a humongous pop. And after, spoiler alert, the NXT Tag Team Champions went over the Street Profits, while the Undisputed Era was celebrating in the ring. Rod Strong, the North American Champion, and the Tag Team Champions in the ring. Adam Cole on the stage celebrating his NXT Championship win. Who should appear behind him but the returning Ciampa.
Oh, nice. Fantastic. There you go. You know, you got Jack Swagger versus on one side and Ciampa on the other. God damn it. We could argue that names are not as big as they used to be, but you remember you'd wait for who would come out at the end of Nitro, who would come out at the end of Raw. It's like that again. That's great. Oh, who was it? Jack Swagger came out? Yeah, but Ciampa came out on NXT. Ah, that's amazing. It's fantastic. That's what I'm talking about. You and I might differ on what show's going to be better every week, and we're not going to do hardcore long reviews of every single show because we go a little bit quicker. However, that kind of stuff, it's good to be a fan again. And I'm an adult, so I don't have 11 hours to watch wrestling every week. But I'm going to catch as much as possible. I was talking to somebody suggested our YouTube fan, and I am blanking on his name. And I am ashamed of myself. I'm going to look it up here. I'll get his name after I say this. But he was like, because I said, throw us suggestions. I love the feedback. Even if it's bad feedback, because I can laugh at you if I think your bad feedback is terrible. I want people who are listening to tell me what else they want to hear. And one of his suggestions were great. Watch MLW. I just don't have the time. I will put it on in the background when I'm editing something, but I cannot give it my full attention. I just don't have the time. And his other suggestion we're going to get to in a second. But MLW, I will say this. I did watch the War Games. I forgot what they called it, actually, with the Von Erichs. And I'll talk about that in a second. But, and it's Voeas on YouTube. I think I'm still pronouncing that incorrectly. But I think I had a point there that I've forgotten. So take it over, Craig, before I get lost again. No, but it'll be fun to watch. The who's going to come out this week? Who's going to come out at the end of the show to attack who? And the Elite, like I said, the Elite got destroyed at the end of Dynamite, so nobody can claim they're putting themselves over. Oh, Pac, the bastard Pac, formerly known as Devil, had an incredible match. What's the word? The phrase I'm looking for? Who knew he was a good wrestler? Been so long. Yeah, everyone, exactly. Anything else about Wednesday night? Because I do have a few points I want to blow through real quick. No pun intended.
No, I just watched the end of the Cody Rhodes Sammy Guevara match. Excellent. Both guys worked their asses off, and it was a great ending.
There is a great Kevin Smith, Jay and Silent Bob were there.
Yes, ringside.
Yeah, but they also did a segment with New Jersey's own Joey Janela on Twitter, which was very funny, where Joey recognized them as the well-known drug peddlers that they are. And I stole that phrase from Kevin Smith and the Clerks animated commentary directly, so just to be a smartass. And they recognized Joey Janela as they used to have sexual relations with his sister at the same time at one point. So it's like watching the movie. That was so cool. That little, I did not expect them there because it's DC. I expected a little DC lookout. Local celebrity? Nah, Jay and Silent Bob showed up from New Jersey. Hell yeah.
And they mentioned because it might be at the invitation of Chris Jericho, who I just found out from them today during AEW that Chris Jericho was in Jay and Silent Bob reboot.
He's the bad guy.
Yeah, he's a bad guy. Who knew it was typecasting? And what was the name of the tag team that came out from Jersey?
They used to be the Smash Brothers, and I can't remember now.
Yeah. But the first thing they said to Jay and Silent Bob was, Morris Day at the time sucked.
Yeah, well, how dare you? How dare?
Did you ever say an unkind word about Morris Day at the time?
Absolutely not. Because Prince will come back from the grave and kill you for that.
Yeah.
I also, just real quick, just to nerd out for a second. I don't know if you saw this. Assume you did because I tweeted it. I don't want to dwell on this, but I need to mention this because we're both Kevin Smith marks. That's where we met 11 years ago in November. I'm so happy he's announced Clerks 3 officially. And he made it with Jeff Anderson, who is the one and only Randall in Clerks and Clerks 2. And his idea for Clerks 3, I'm very excited about that. Kevin Smith, sometimes all it takes is a heart attack to to clear your mind. I'll find out one day.
It got him reunited with Ben Affleck. Just one simple heart attack, and next thing you know, a 10-year friendship has been renewed.
I blame Jennifer Gardner for that. I'll never forgive her. So the other news I wanted to mention was one NWA. I don't know if you've seen any of this. I think I showed you the screenshots of the NWA television studio.
Yes, amazing, impeccable what they've done with it, looking exactly like the old NWA Mid-Atlantic studios with the flags from every nation in the back, with the TV set right next to the ring. Just awesome. Absolutely beautiful.
The nice claustrophobic, and I mean that in a positive way, feel of the interviewers being right next to the ring, which is right next to the fans, the flags hanging up, and it looks as if the studio never left and they just updated the technology around it. That's exactly what it looks like. They got a new screen inside the wall, the HD screen. They have a nicer desk. The wood fit. It's just gorgeous. And the official name for that little sect of NWA will be NWA Georgia, like the old days, and the name of the show will be NWA Power. And I'm not upset about not airing on a Saturday because I do need a break from wrestling every now and then. It will be airing on YouTube on Tuesday nights at 6:05, and it will be airing later again for those who missed it on the Fight TV app, taking a cue, I guess, from MLW, who does this brilliant thing. This is absolutely brilliant for a smaller company. They'll air the show live, delayed, taped on BN Sports. Then they'll air it on their website. Then they'll air it on the Fight TV app. Then they'll air it on YouTube. Each night, a different place will air it. It's unbelievable. I love it. So, I am so excited for NWA television. I really am. The other tidbit was this Eddie Kingston thing. Eddie Kingston is now with Homicide, and they are also working with the Dawson brothers. And I don't know if you know any of those people, but Eddie Kingston is now mouthpiece. Go ahead.
Eddie Kingston and Homicide, I'm very well aware of. I got to see many of their matches when they were here in Philly. But they're with whom?
Dawson Brothers.
Okay. And what company is that? Where are they?
Well, they're NWA now.
Oh, wow. I mean, okay.
It's going to be. They've been with not MLW, AML Wrestling Indies. I suggest you look them up. And I mean, not just you, anybody who is listening. Very, very, they're awesome. Just these big guys. They're not fat, but they're just this powerhouse tag team that are wrestling all over the indies. And they have It's one of those teams that have 5-star matches every time they go to a company. And well, Eddie Kingston has them under their under his wheelhouse right now with Homicide. So I would say that the NWA Tag Team Division is about to get a shot in the arm, and especially they're debuting on that TV show. Oh man, imagine Dawson Brothers versus Jobber 1 and Jobber 2 at the NWA studio, a la the old days when it was Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard just beating the crap out of these, Bill and Joe from East, Tennessee.
Oh yeah,
for 20 minutes.
Or the Mulkey Brothers.
Oh my God. Homicide just beating up on Wayne Smith for 5 minutes and then cutting a promo with Eddie Kingston at ringside. My God.
Well, this is one of the big benefits of having so much wrestling on television now, is that you get professional wrestlers who would never have had any opportunity to be on any national stage. Now they're getting that chance. The people that we've seen wrestle in high school gymnasiums and in the tiny little indie promotions that we watch, either here in Philly or down in Virginia where you are. Now they'll have more opportunities to wrestle in front of a nationwide audience. It's something they never would have had before.
Yeah.
And those job guys, the people that we made, the Mulkeys and the Mike Andersons and the George Souths and the SD Joneses and the Frankie Williamses and stuff like that, made their living doing that. But now on a much broader scale, we can see people that we've watched now have a chance to be seen nationwide.
Yeah. It's going to be a good. I don't say weeding out the week, but it's going to be, you're going to see who's going to shine and who's not going to shine. And it's going to be real quick, especially with the social media turnaround these days. You know what I mean? Going to be real quick, find out who's doing what. With that being said, sir, I believe it is time for you to take it away and take us back into the time
Gentlemen
machine.
And ladies, children of certain age, please join me as we gather around the Snapchat and I take you back to a time when the universe were referred to as fans, where titles were actually called belts, and when sports entertainment was professional wrestling. We're going to go back to September 26, 1977, a very important date, a huge date in the WWF history. It was September 26, 1977, when the current, then World Wrestling Federation heavyweight champion superstar Billy Graham took on the American Dream Dusty Rhodes in Madison Square Garden. This bout was shown in its entirety on the Dusty Rhodes DVD, The Dream. Vince McMahon even chimes in and says, "Oh, I'll never forget that night." It was absolutely magical, electric. It was on the cover of the Wrestler magazine, photographed by Bill Apter. 26,000 people in Madison Square Garden. It was a sellout. And even when the Madison Square Garden sells out, the adjacent Felt Forum, which is right next door to Madison Square Garden, they would show the matches on closed circuit TV. Back then, that was sold out.
Wow.
All to see Dusty Rhodes versus superstar Billy Graham. Now, this is part of the handshake deal that Vince McMahon Sr. Had with Eddie Graham in Florida, that they would exchange talent. And among those coming up to that wrestled in Florida at the time and would come up to the WWF were Kevin Sullivan, future WWF champion Bob Backlund, and Dusty Rhodes. And because Championship Wrestling from Florida was being shown in the Northeast at the time, Dusty Rhodes, simply by being seen on TV in the Northeast, was a big deal. And when he wrestled in the WWF, he only wrestled 3 matches before getting a shot at superstar Billy Graham. The charisma that Dusty Rhodes had, the charisma that superstar Graham already had, made it a sellout like that. And again, like I've said with Bruno before, there was no music, there was no pyro, there was no techno. Dusty Rhodes made it out of the dressing room, big flashy robe, big hat. The place went nuts, absolutely nuts. Dusty Rhodes dancing around like Muhammad Ali, jabbing, shadowboxing. And when Superstar came out, was an even bigger pop. Dusty won that match by count out. But to get the fans' juice, he took the belt, put it around his waist, and started proclaiming himself champion. Uh, the announcer, Howard Finkel, announced that Dusty had won the match but was not champion. And Dusty, which wrestlers did not do back then. This is something that no one had done. Dusty got on the house mic and said, "Superstar, I came a long way to whip your ass. Now get out of here." And again, the place went nuts because the microphone came down from the ceiling. It wasn't a handheld mic. It was big double dual mics that came down and had the Madison Square Garden logo on it. But Dusty got on the mic and called Superstar out, and he said the word ass, which also never happened. But yeah, that was a huge night in my childhood. I remember reading about it in the After magazines. Again, it's on the Dusty Rhodes DVD box that was put together by WWE called The Dream. Vince McMahon talked about it in reverent tones about what a great night that was. Very historic night. But September 26, 1977, Superstar Billy Graham, Dusty Rhodes, an absolutely classic match, if not just for the feel of it and with the two guys involved, two of the most charismatic, influential wrestlers of all time, going at it in front of 26,000 sold out fans in Madison Square Garden. So staying on that date, September 26, 1984. I don't know if you got to see the Adrian Street documentary on the WWE network. Adrian Street, speaking of influential, all the flamboyant wrestlers you've seen, you wrestling fans that listen to this podcast, that you've seen throughout your years of wrestling, be it Goldust or adorable Adrian Adonis or Lenny Lane in the WCW, or even up to Tangerine Dream right now, all those flamboyant, ambiguously gay wrestlers that you see were all just pale imitations of the exotic Adrian Street. Nothing against those wrestlers that take those flamboyant, ambiguously gay characters and make it their own, but Adrian Street did it first. Adrian Street still does it best. And during the WWE documentary on the life of Adrian Street, they showed the match between Adrian Street and Terry Taylor, who's now works for the WWE. And Terry Taylor talked about how he lost the Mid-South Television Championship to a kiss when Adrian Street kissed him, and he got flummoxed, and Adrian Street pinned him for the Mid-South Television title. Well, that match took place September 26th, 1984, 35 years ago. Adrian Street defeated Terry Taylor for the Mid-South Television title with a kiss. Staying on that date, September 26th, 1999, 20 years ago, on WWE's Unforgiven in Charlotte, occurred by many considered one of the worst pay-per-view matches in history. Al Snow against the Big Boss Man in a Kennel from Hell match with these attack dogs surrounding ringside, dogs who could not have been more tamer in their lives, but Al Snow defeated Big Boss Man in what many people consider one of the worst pay-per-view matches in history. Do you have any recollections of this match, Dan? Or did you block it out like the rest of us?
I blocked it out, but I do remember being just like, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm moving on.
And we will move on. September 27th, 1981. This is also a theme of moving on. Um, Terry Gordy and Jimmy Snuka. The Freebirds had broken up. This is 1981. Terry Gordy and Jimmy Snuka. Odd combination. But they were the Georgia National Tag Team Champions of the NWA. They lost their tag team championship September 27, 1981, to the team of Michael Hayes and former All-Pro linebacker for the Oakland Raiders, Otis Sistrunk. And yeah, it happened on this night. And a little bit after that, Otis Sistrunk, the latest professional football player to turn wrestler, just decided he didn't want to wrestle anymore. So he quit. Not only did he quit Georgia Championship Wrestling, he just quit wrestling altogether. So the National Tag Team Champions were just held up just like that.
I'm gonna ask this question of you, and please understand where I'm asking the way I'm asking this question is just to frame it for listeners, and I'm not comparing the two in that way, other than Bill Goldberg. And I think I know your answer. That's why I'm asking this. Who was the best professional football player that became a professional wrestler? And I know you know where I'm going with this.
The best former football player to become a professional wrestler. My answer has always been a tie between Ernie Ladd and Wahoo McDaniel.
I figured that's why I asked that question.
Yeah. Only because Ernie Ladd was as great a football player as he was a wrestler.
Yeah, and Booker.
Booker too. Ernie Ladd was an All-Pro in the AFL. And he was he was on the Kansas City Chiefs, one of their Super Bowl teams. Ernie Ladd is in the College Football Hall of Fame. He's the greatest defensive player in the history of Grambling University, one of the great historical black college universities of all time. One of the great heels of all time. Oh, and again, and you said one of the great bookers. Wahoo McDaniel's another one. Was a great career with the New York Jets, and always mentioned as one of the greatest wrestlers to never win a championship. And I only put Goldberg in there because he only played one season in the NFL, which is why. But Otis Sistrunk was a All-Pro with the Oakland Raiders, the John Madden Raiders. He won a Super Bowl, and he decided to become a professional wrestler who didn't do anything other than shoulder tackle and block. And he teamed up with Michael Hayes to defeat Terry Gordy and Jimmy Snuka, making it, and didn't quit wrestling altogether. The main thing, though, the reason why he was teaming up with Michael Hayes, because he was a last minute substitute for Kevin Von Erich.
Oh my God!
Michael Hayes and Kevin Von Erich were a tag team in Georgia. Okay, this was 3 years before the greatest tag team feud in professional wrestling history between the Freebirds and the Von Erichs. 3 years earlier, Michael Hayes and Kevin Von Erich were a tag team. And Kevin Von Erich was injured. Otis Sistrunk took his place, and they won the National Tag Team Champion. Had Kevin Von Erich not been injured, Michael Hayes and Kevin Von Erich, the Freebirds and Von Erich would have been champions. That theme, that is insane. On that same theme of quitting and just taking your ball and running with it, September 27th, that same date, 1993, the WWF, officially stripped Shawn Michaels of the Intercontinental title because of a dispute. I can't recall because Shawn Michaels has left the company so many times. I don't know if this was his I lost my smile one, but Shawn Michaels was
95, 96.
No, it's not. Okay, well, it's 93. He left the company. He was stripped of the Intercontinental title, and this would pave the way for Razor Ramon and Rick Martel to compete for the Intercontinental title in a ladder in a it was a battle royal, and they were the last two, and Razor Ramon became the Intercontinental champion, which would lead to their epic ladder match at Madison Square Garden for WrestleMania 10. But it all started September 27th, 1993, when the WWF stripped Shawn Michaels after Shawn Michaels left the company of the Intercontinental title. September 28th, 1979, speaking of strange people and battle royals, Mike George and Bruiser Bob Sweeten became the first ever Mid-South Tag Team Champions. The Mid-South Tag Team Championship will be held by some of the greatest tag teams of all time, the Rock and Roll Express, the Midnight Express, the Freebirds, the Sheep Herders, who you know as the Bushwhackers, the Fantastics. But the first ever Mid-South Tag Team Champions were Mike George and Bob Sweeten. They were the last two people in a battle royal, and then they wrestled each other. Now, and the winner would get to be the tag team champion with their partner of their choosing. So Mike George won. Mike George defeated Buck Robley. Mike George and Colonel Buck Robley were the last two in the battle royal. Mike George won their singles bout, so he chose Bruiser Bob Sweeten as his partner to be the Mid-South Tag Team Champions. Had Colonel Buck Robley won, he would have chosen Bill Watts. So, Mike George and Bob Sweeten became the first ever Mid-South Tag Team Champions, September 28th, 1979. September 28th, 1985, a huge day, a huge card. This was the first Super Clash put on by the AWA. This took place in Comiskey Park in Chicago. 21,000 fans. And you had the AWA, the NWA, World Class, and All Japan wrestlers all on the same card in an outdoor stadium. This is at the height of the WWF's monopoly. But the AWA, the NWA, World Class, and All Japan came together to put on Super Clash. And some of the matches that took place, it was 13 matches on the card. Sherry Martel won the AWA Women's title during this card, defeating Candy Devine. The World Class Heavyweight Champion, Kerry Von Erich, defeated Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin.
Wow.
The AWA Tag Team Champions, the Road Warriors, defeated the Freebirds, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. This would be the first, last, and only time that the Freebirds wore the Rebel flag face paint. For some reason, people always think they show pictures of the Freebirds. They show the Freebirds with the Rebel flag face paint. They only wore it one time and one time only, and that was on this date, September 28th, 1985, at Super Clash.
I don't believe it.
Telemark. So the Freebirds actually pinned the Road Warriors, but because Michael Hayes used brass knuckles, it was reversed, and the Road Warriors defeated the Freebirds. Crusher Blackwell defeated Kamala in a body slam challenge match. And the NWA champion Ric Flair defeated Magnum TA, and the AWA champion Rick Martel went to a double count out with Stan Hansen.
It's very interesting that that would happen on a date, and you had mentioned the Super Clash this week after we talked about the beginning of the Wednesday Night Wars, changing the landscape of wrestling forever. You know, we'll be talking about this day 10 years from now, one way or the other, or still. But because the WWE, for the most part, and prefaces with we know Vince is a low down dirty promoter, and he's need to get dirt. We know how it works. You and I are not stupid. We know how that works. And when he's had to be truthful and or the complete opposite mafia-like way, he's done it to survive. And which is why he is where he is still to this day. It's no secret. But they've been fairly diplomatic and very all wrestling is good since the AEW has announced the show and they've put on the show and all that good stuff that has happened, and AEW is going at it, and I don't mean this in a complaining way, has gone at them full force since day one, and as they should. To take the big dog down, you got to shoot at the big dog. That's how it works. It's how it's worked for all time. But then you mentioned the original war, which started before the Monday Night War and after the Golden Era Territory War, which was WWF taking over the country and the little territory. I say little territories, there was World Class after they separated from NWA. There's NWA, there was AWA that could not, they were doing so badly that they had to join together to at least try to take a run at the machine that was the WWF. And I think we look back retrospectively. Is that a word? Did I make that up? That's a word. That flies, sure. That the Super Clash was a joke, and it wasn't. This is a big deal at the time. These were companies that were warring themselves for attendance and for ratings and for money that decided we got to work together. If we don't work together, we're screwed. Now we know how it turned out, but in the day, these were big deals, like these huge super cards of wrestlers you would not see outside the NWA, of course, where the champion would travel, working together and having matches together. And I think that's lost over time because it's like, well, the indies, people wrestle each other all the time now. In those days, this is as big as it could have gotten. It didn't do so well. I really wish it did better because of the names involved, but I don't think we should undersell the Super Clashes of what they were for at the time.
No, we shouldn't. And if only because this is also part of the Pro Wrestling USA faction that took place in '85, where all the AWA, the NWA, World Class, they had a show called Pro Wrestling USA where they would show wrestling from all over the world that wasn't WWF in an effort to get everyone together. And in Super Clash, it was put on by the AWA, but the only time you would see something like that, the AWA and the NWA World Champion on the same card, or the AWA tag team, the Road Warriors, facing off against an NWA team, or vice versa, or World Class, Kerry Von Erich taking on an AWA wrestler at the time, Jimmy Garvin. It was huge. I honestly thought, because I remember this card, Dan, I honestly thought, looking back now, that would have been a great time. Ric Flair defeated Magnum TA. I thought that would have been a great opportunity for Magnum TA to go over to even just for a little while. Magnum obviously was groomed to be the NWA champion, just a transitional champion, but I thought that would have been a great way to legitimize the Super Clash if Magnum had gone over Ric Flair on that particular card, and then have him regain it at an NWA show. In fact, I think if it one of the reasons why it didn't work, invariably, all the Super Clashes in Pro Wrestling USA, because all those different promoters just didn't get along, and everyone wanted their own piece of the pie, and they wanted their pie to be bigger. And World Class should go on before NWA, and AWA is putting on the card, so they should have the main event. And Ric Flair is I'm Ric Flair and he's Rick Martel. Nothing against him, but I'm
Ric Flair.
Still Ric Flair. I'm Ric Flair. So that's why it didn't work. But had I had this been an NWA card that put on a Super Clash, I think you would have seen a title change. But I always thought that if Magnum was ever going to go over, it should have been at that Super Clash at Comiskey Park in front of 21,000 fans at a stadium show.
I mean, we talk about the failure of Super Clash. 21,000 for a wrestling show at Comiskey Park, kind of a big deal.
Yeah, kind of a big deal. Speaking of big deals, on that same day, Dan, on that same year, in September 28th, 1985, while Super Clash was going on in Chicago, 800 miles to the east, right here in Philadelphia, at the beautiful air-conditioned Philadelphia Spectrum, was a massive card that took place, a tag team match with the unlikely duo, Roddy Piper and Bob Orton, taking on Paul Orndorff and Bruno Sammartino
Wow.
in a tag team match. They lost by countout afterwards. Paul Orndorff went nuts and attacked everyone because they laid out Bruno. But the main event of that card, Dan, right here in Philly at the Spectrum, September 28th, 1985, Hulk Hogan defeated Randy Savage after Savage missed the flying elbow smash in their first match ever.
Wow. At the Spectrum?
The first time they ever wrestled each other. Hogan versus Savage. First time, September 28th, 1985, right here in Philadelphia.
As much as I crap on Hulk Hogan and I say he wasn't, in that way, he wasn't a great worker in looks, but he was a great worker because he was Hulk Hogan. Yeah, I know that argument. But can you imagine those two in 85 wrestling? Wow. Is there a video of this?
It was shown on Prism. I don't know if that footage still exists, but it was taped. But because all the matches in Spectrum were on Prism.
Yeah.
But their first match ever was 1985. Right here in Philly, yeah, and of course a historic rivalry.
It exists. I just found it.
Okay, there you go.
Unbelievable. I'll send that to you later. I gotta watch that. That's crazy.
Yeah, please do it. And hell, if you can add it to this podcast, that'd be even more awesome.
Yeah, big time thing because I gotta stop this and then turn off the black and white, and I'm not ready for that. Harry will watch this and he'll wanna fix it. That's on him.
September 29th, 1985. The next day, the day after Super Clash, when the Road Warriors took on the Freebirds, the very next day in St. Paul, Minnesota, it shows you kind of schedule that they kept. The Road Warriors, after a year and 3 months, lost their AWA Tag Team title to Jimmy Garvin and Steve Regal, thanks to help from Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy. But the Road Warriors would lose the AWA Tag Team title, their first World Tag Team title, the first of three. Obviously, they would go on to losing the AWA Tag Team title since they were wrestling already. The Road Warriors were wrestling in the NWA and in Florida and in St. Louis and in Georgia. They were the most in-demand tag team in history. So they were going to be wrestling full-time in the NWA. So get the belts off of them, and after a year and 3 months, they finally lost the AWA Tag Team title, their first World Tag Team title, to Jimmy Garvin and Steve Regal. Again, on that same day, tells you back how great it is. We watch AEW and NXT today. Well, back then in the AWA, you had the Road Warriors losing the AWA Tag Team title. That same day in the NWA, in the Omni, the NWA champion Ric Flair defeated Nikita Koloff in a cage match. After the match was over, Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev came to the ring and attacked Ric Flair. Who would make the save but Dusty Rhodes? Dusty Rhodes came into the cage, ran off the Russians, and saved Ric Flair. All is good, right? Wrong, because who should attack Dusty Rhodes but Ole and Arn Anderson? And along with Ric Flair, broke Dusty Rhodes' leg. Ric Flair had the figure four on Dusty. Arn came off the top rope, landed on Dusty's leg. Magnum TA, the Rock and Roll Express, and Sam Houston all tried to get into the cage, climbing over. Next to the Mayhem in Memphis, with Jerry Lawler getting his head shaved while Paul Lee, Austin Idol, and Tommy Rich were in the cage with fans trying to jump over the cage. That's the closest thing I've seen to that. What that happened in the Omni on this date, September 29th, 1985. As the Rock and Roll Express and Magnum TA tried to get in the cage, fans were going nuts. And they were a lot closer to the ring than they were in Memphis. So fans were trying to get into that cage too to help out Dusty.
I'm not asking to challenge you. I'm asking legitimate to add a third, to either add a third one or for you to tell me this was crazier factually. Is it crazier than the night that you referenced earlier when Michael P.S. Hayes slammed the cage door onto Mike or not Mike, Dave or
Kevin?
Carey?
It was Carey.
Yeah, was it crazier than that where people were trying to climb the cage to try to kill the Freebirds in Dallas?
Yes.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, Christmas night in 1982 when Terry Gordy slammed the cage door on Kerry Von Erich in his NWA title match with Ric Flair, because the Freebirds were good guys up until then.
That's
so that
true.
was just more of a shock when they turned on Kerry. Their problem was getting back to the dressing room.
Yes, gotcha.
Because Kerry had already lost and Michael had left the cage, so their problem was getting out of the dressing room. In Memphis, Jerry Lawler was in the cage getting his head shaved and getting beaten to a pulp by Austin Idol and Tommy Rich and Paul Lee, and they were trapped inside because fans were scaling both sides of the cage.
That's insane. That's insane.
Yeah. In the Omni, it was the Rock and Roll Express, Magnum TA, and Sam Houston trying to get in the cage, and they were beaten down by Ole Arn and Rick. And then fans started jumping in because when the faces, when the Rock and Roll and Magnum weren't having any luck, well, fans said, well, hey, I'm closer, man. Why don't I try to help these guys out? Now I can get in the cage since you guys can't. And then that turned into a huge problem because security actually had to call the police from that was outside. The police were out on the concourse. The security was inside the arena. So they had to call the police into the crowd to get them down to ringside to help the wrestlers get out of the cage. But yeah, that happened. But this is the power of Dusty Rhodes. When the Dusty trying to help out Ric Flair and he gets attacked, and so the two heel factions that took place September 29th, 1985. So between the AWA and the NWA, that was one busy night. 2 years later, September 29th, 1987, the aforementioned Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard would defeat the Rock and Roll Express to win their first NWA Tag Team title.
Oh.
Setting up the feud, the Midnight Express had attacked the Rock and Roll Express before the match. Ricky Morton was laid out, so Robert Gibson had to go it alone against Tully and Arn. Acquitted himself very well. Ricky Morton came back, head bandaged, blood all over him, little girls crying their eyes out, and but couldn't overcome the odds. Tully and Arn won. That, of course, would set up the eventual Midnight Express versus Tully and Arn feud, where Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express, who were the United States Tag Team titles, said, we'd be the NWA Tag Team titles, but it's hard to get a match with a team that won't face you. And, and by the way, we did help you guys win the NWA Tag Team titles. You're welcome. And that laid the seed. But September 29th, 1987, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard would defeat the Rock and Roll Express for the NWA Tag Team titles. A forgotten point in history, Dan, took place September 29th, 1992. Scott Steiner turned heel. In a match, the Hollywood Blondes, Steve Austin, Stunning Steve, and Flying Brian defeated Marcus Alexander Bagwell and Scott Steiner when Steiner turned on his partner and left Bagwell to be pinned. Steiner turned heel, and he was supposed to go on to win the NWA television title from Ricky Steamboat at the time, but instead Steiner they taped it for WCW TV. But Steiner left the company. He was upset with the way he was being used. He didn't like the fact that they were going to break up the Steiner tag team, and he left. So that Scott Steiner heel turn, which would come up 2 years later, but that was forgotten.
Wow.
Even though it was taped, and it did happen.
That's interesting. 6 years later, what happens?
Yeah, even more interesting. September 29th, 1993, a landmark date. One of the greatest teams in NWA history, maybe one of the greatest teams of all time. They're Hall of Famers, for gosh sakes. But they're the first time they ever wrestled in the WWF. The Rock and Roll Express made their WWF debut September 29th, 1993.
Wow.
They were the current Smoky Mountain Tag Team Champions, but they had their first ever match in the WWF when they lost to Well Done. Timothy Well and Stephen Dunn came with an asterisk though. They lost due to interference by the Heavenly Bodies and Jim Cornette.
Oh, yeah.
Well done. Well done. Reinforcing the longest tag team feud in the history of professional wrestling, Jim Cornette, still, even with a different team, still a thorn in the side of the Rock and Roll Express almost 30 years later. But yeah, the Rock and Roll Express's first WWF match took place September 29th, 1993. I included this just because it was one of my favorite memories of this era that we may be seeing again. September 29th, 1997, on a Monday Nitro in Worcester, Massachusetts, the Giant defeated Curt Hennig of the NWO by disqualification. And afterward, the NWO attacked the Giant, and he was holding his own until he got hit in the back with a belt. I think the United States belt. Sting came down to the ring with the bat to clear the NWO out, but then he went to the side of the ring and dropped the bat and took on the NWO by himself. And that was one of the loudest pops I've ever heard. And that was one of my great memories of the Monday Night Wars.
I was about to say that's what we're needing during this Wednesday Night War thing. We're still going to need that pop, because that reaction when he looks them all in the eye and just goes, I did it off camera, but he's just like, and he just, with the Sting speed, just beats the holy hell out of everybody in that ring. We talk about Jericho pops and the Sting pop when he won that world title. And Stone Cold Steve Austin when the glass breaks. I have still not heard anything that comparably loud to that as well. It is so loud when he just starts going crazy. And those were in those days. That's when people, and I think it happened consecutively for about 1.5 to 2 years, where no matter what happened, people were chucking stuff into the ring, no matter if it was a face thing or a heel thing. Sodas, beer, trash, signs, hats, shirts. It was all going to end up in the ring while that final segment was happening. And it looked like a rainstorm of soda and beer while Sting was just beating everybody up. And I will still mark out for that. I will mark out for that anytime I see it.
That's why I included it in the Wrestling Historian.
Very much.
well, because any Sting appearance during this time, during the Monday Night Wars, is memorable and iconic. I mean, you mentioned YouTube earlier. If you go on YouTube and just look at the chapters, Sting versus the NWO, from the very beginning, and how it just grew and grew, and every time Sting made an appearance, like you said, it was an event. Almost like at the end of every Monday Nitro, with the NWO in the ring, it would be the shower of debris from the fans, and just like with the NWO, it's like certain wrestlers would get their weekly spray paint. It seemed like Ray Traylor, the Big Boss Man, got spray painted every week for like 2 months straight.
Yeah, he did.
But Sting coming out was just, I mean, and you never knew when, or how, when he would come through the ceiling or he would come through the crowd. It was
Hold on,
memorable.
I want everybody to hear this on the show when he drops the bat. Hold on, he just drops his bat. Here, I'm just gonna play it. Listen to that. Yeah, that's an incredible sound. And just to tack on what you said, it was probably one of the best builds in wrestling history.
Yeah, yeah. And it led up to the single biggest pay-per-view at the time of all time, Starrcade '98. I mean, Sting and Hogan, absolutely, which they botched, but still the most watched pay-per-view at the
I'm
time.
not gonna say a word.
Yeah. Um, September 30th, 1960. Uh, Two of the most important figures in the history of professional wrestling, maybe the two most important figures in the history of Japanese wrestling, ironically enough, made their pro wrestling debuts on the same card. Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki started their careers on the same night on the same card uh, for the JWA, the Japanese Wrestling Association. Uh, Baba would win his match, Antonio Inoki would lose his, but the two of them would redefine professional wrestling in Japan. Between All Japan and New Japan, they both went their separate ways. They both had tremendous success making Japanese wrestling at different points in time the best wrestling on earth. Launched more careers, some maybe even more, not only of great Japanese wrestlers that we've come to know and love, like Jumbo Tsuruta, the Great Muta, Tatsumi Fujinami, um, Kenta Kobashi, the Great Sasuke, all came through Giant Baba or Antonio Inoki, and the American wrestlers that they made famous just from wrestling for their companies. Van Vader, Stan Hansen, Steve Williams, Terry Gordy, Ted DiBiase. They were known here, but in Japan, were on a whole nother level. Bruiser Brody was another one. Hulk Hogan had his first world championship ever was in Japan. Um, if it wasn't for his success in Japan, when he came back to the United States in the AWA, he would not have been the accomplished professional that he became. But it all started with these two, Giant Baba and Antonio Inoki, who made their wrestling debuts September 30th, 1960, at the same time on the same card.
Unreal.
Speaking of historic and unreal, September 30th, 1972, in the WWF, the first ever Shea Stadium card was a dream match called Bill the Match of the Century. And it was the Worldwide Wrestling Federation Heavyweight Champion, Pedro Morales, took on the man he was often compared to and never really lived up to, but a match the fans wanted to see. Pedro Morales versus Bruno Sammartino.
Oh wow. Wow.
Pedro had won the belt from Ivan Koloff, the only man to ever beat Bruno Sammartino. Pedro would sell out wrestling cards the way that Bruno did. People still missed Bruno. People always wondered, well, could Bruno have beaten Pedro? Pedro beat Ivan, but Bruno never beat Ivan. Can Bruno beat Pedro? Could Pedro beat Bruno? And so in front of 22,508 fans in Shea Stadium, these two wrestled to a 75-minute draw.
Wow.
And at the end, they both shook hands, both hugged, and both of them weren't even breathing heavy.
So our answer is they were equals.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Insane.
Absolutely insane. And that would be their only match together against each other.
Perfect.
Pedro would have continued to sell out in Madison Square Garden, Philadelphia, Boston Garden, Washington, D.C., up until 1973. Um, and Bruno would go into semi-retirement until he came back and would get the belt back. Both of them were defeated transition champions. Uh, Bruno was champion, as we know, for almost 8 years. He lost to Ivan Koloff. Koloff held it for a month. Pedro wins it to continue the reign for 2 years. Pedro would lose the belt to Stan Stasiak in Philly. Stasiak will hold it for 8 days. Bruno would regain it. So Stasiak and Koloff were your transitional champions to keep the belt on Pedro and Bruno, who were the two biggest box office attractions in the WWF history at the time. But they only wrestled each other one time at Shea Stadium, and this would be the first Shea Stadium card that the WWF would put on. They put on only three um, Shea Stadium cards, and Bruno Sammartino would main event all three of them.
Wow.
First one against Pedro. The second one in 1976, his revenge match against Stan Hansen. That was the undercard of the Muhammad Ali Antonio Inoki Super Clash in Japan. And the last one, August 9, 1980, when he would face Larry Zbyszko in a steel cage. Bruno would headline all three Shea Stadium cards, and the first one, September 30th, 1972, against then champion Pedro Morales. On that same date, speaking of rarities, September 30th, 1985, the NWA Great American Bash would go to Memphis. The only time, it would only go to the NWA would only go to Memphis twice during the Great American Bash years, and this one was in 1985. Because this is like more or less an AWA stronghold, but Memphis was always its own territory. But on this card, Great American Bash 1985 in Memphis, Tully Blanchard and Magnum TA would go to a double disqualification. The NWA Tag Team Champions and Memphis's own, the Rock and Roll Express, where they got their start in Memphis, they would defeat Ivan and Nikita Koloff. My dream match, two of the most influential tag teams of all time, the Fabulous Ones would defeat the Freebirds. And in only the third time they've ever wrestled each other in their storied careers, the NWA Heavyweight Champion Ric Flair would defeat Jerry Lawler.
Oh, wow.
In a match that went 28 minutes, 45 seconds. Almost 30 minutes, those two went at each other. But Ric Flair took on Jerry Lawler, and for only the third time in their careers, they've wrestled everyone else, but they've only wrestled each other 3 times.
Wow.
And in September 30th, 1990, for his 30th anniversary show, did I mention that Giant Baba had his first match September 30th, 1960?
You did.
Well, September 30th, 1990 was Giant Baba's 30th anniversary show. And he wrestled himself. He wrestled in the main event of that card. Unfortunately, he lost. It was a tag team match. Giant Baba would... Now, this still blows my mind. For his 30th anniversary show, Giant Baba would team up with Abdullah the Butcher. And unfortunately, they would lose their tag team match to the team of Stan Hansen and Andre the Giant. Now, why Giant Baba, who was a legitimate 7'1", why he didn't team up with Andre the Giant to go up against Stan Hansen and Abdullah the Butcher, or I don't know, Stan Hansen and Bruiser Brody, I don't know. Oh, Bruiser wasn't there. Sorry, never mind. But I always thought that was a weird team for his 30th anniversary show.
That match would have been difficult to do.
Yeah. But Baba and Abdullah the Butcher took on Stan Hansen and Andre the Giant. So, wow. Crazy. October 1st, this date is marred in some sadness. Rick McGraw, Quick Draw Rick McGraw, one of the great underachieving wrestlers, great body, great look, just height deficient. But he would have the biggest angle of his career where he would challenge Roddy Piper. He went on Piper's Pit and asked why Piper. He suffered through all of Piper's insults, and he asked why Piper never wrestled on TV. All he does is talk. Well, if you're as good as you say you are, why don't you get in the ring? And so it was a TV taping, and so later on in that TV taping, Roddy Piper took on Rick McGraw, and this was the first DDT I ever saw.
Oh
Roddy
wow.
Piper would defeat Rick McGraw after giving him two devastating DDTs, and Rick McGraw they mentioned it. They made mention of it during the match how he had wrestled, he had a broken neck before. Actually, he had his neck broken on television in the match with Killer Khan. Killer Khan gave him a back suplex, and Rick landed right on his neck. And to
Ouch.
his credit, because Rick McGraw, if any of our fans remember Rick McGraw, he had a hell of a neck, and his traps were unbelievably huge. But he continued wrestling the match with a broken neck. But in this match against Roddy Piper, Piper gave him a couple DDTs, and the referee called the bout. The really, really unfortunate thing, Dan, was because of the way the WWF taped television shows back then, they would tape the match and not air them for another 3 to 4 weeks.
Oh
So
no.
when his match with Roddy Piper aired, it aired the same weekend that Rick McGraw died. Um, and Rick died of a heart attack at a very young age. And because of our lack of information that we have now with social media, and because when the match was shown on television the same weekend he died, people almost tried to put it together that it was Roddy Piper that caused Rick Martel's untimely death, because the way Rick McGraw sold the DDTs and the neck breakers that Roddy Piper gave him, that caused his death. But that wasn't the truth. It was just really, really bad timing. On that same date, October 1st, 1992, Kerry Von Erich was sentenced to 6 felony counts of prescription forgery. He received a 10-year suspended sentence and 10 years supervised probation, but no jail time. But it was 4 months later when he violated his parole, when he violated his probation, rather, when he was arrested for cocaine possession. He was looking at serious jail time, and rather than do that, he took his own life. But October 1st, 1992 was when he was sentenced, and that's what started his demise. But yeah, October 1st was a very dark day in professional wrestling. Which brings us to today in wrestling history. Very light day. We went from dark to light. On this date, Dan, 1993, right here in Philly, at the ECW Arena. ECW, back then it was called NWA Bloodfest 2. ECW was still a member of the NWA at the time. On that card, Sabu would defeat Shane Douglas to win his first ECW heavyweight title. But the opening bout was a bout between the Tasmaniac and Tommy Dreamer. And this would be Tommy Dreamer's ECW debut.
Oh wow.
26 years ago today, Dan, Tommy Dreamer had his first match in the ECW.
Wrestling has not been the same since. And I think I've seen Tommy Dreamer naked or without clothes on more than I've seen Ric Flair's ass. And that's a lot of times.
It's a lot of ass, too.
That's a lot of ass.
But yeah, on 26 years ago today, Tommy Dreamer made his ECW debut. And I got to say, Dan, I miss the suspenders.
I don't.
Yeah. And on this date, ironically, as we approach Friday Night SmackDown on Fox 2 days from now, on this date, 2009, 10 years ago, WWE celebrated the 10th anniversary of SmackDown. With announcers Jim Ross and Todd Grisham.
Todd.
Yeah.
We're having a time.
So 10 years ago today, Dan, these are some of the matches that took place.
Oh boy, I'm ready.
Batista defeated Kane. And check out this tag team. John Morrison and Kofi Kingston defeated Dolph Ziggler and The Miz. Again, that's 10 years ago today. Melina defeated Michelle McCool for the women's championship. CM Punk had and had an interview segment with The Undertaker.
Wow.
There was a pull apart brawl between R-Truth and Drew McIntyre. And in the main event, DX, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels teamed up with John Cena and The Undertaker to defeat Legacy, Ted DiBiase Jr., Randy Orton, CM Punk, and Cody Rhodes.
Wow.
That was 10 years ago today. And some of the wrestlers that I mentioned just now are still very much a part of WWE and AEW right now. So more things change, the more they stay the same.
And some of them will probably be on the 20th?
Yeah.
You're hitting 20?
Mm-hmm.
My God. Yeah, we are hitting 20. Some of them will be at the 20th anniversary this week.
This week. And that, my friends, is called The Wrestling Historian.
Well, thank you very much, Craig. As always, The Wrestling Historian is a wonderful, wonderful time. And I love talking about old wrestling and new wrestling with you. By the way, it occurred to me, please seek out the footage of Jushin Thunder Liger transforming back into Kenshin Liger last week. My God, that never gets old. He's only done it a handful of times, much like even less than Demon Balor. When you've really, 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 really gotten to Jushin Liger, or he really, really, really needs to turn it up, Kenshin will come out without the mask, with just face paint, and we talk about guys that wrestled for a long time and guys that never aged. My God, I don't think we can put over. I want that DVD. I want the WWE to find a way to sign a deal with New Japan. I want a Jushin Thunder Liger DVD retrospective, or New Japan put it out, because he's on his farewell tour. I need that, and I need that now, because my God, that guy has wrestled everybody that's ever been somebody since the 90s. It's just unbelievable. And the sound that place makes. What's amazing is the Japanese commentator, when he's ripping his mask off and he's ripping the sleeves off and he just reveals his face smiling because he's got the mist going, Kenshin Liger! Kenshin Liger! It is amazing. It's amazing to hear this guy going crazy as he spits the mist and he picks up a pair of scissors. He's going to stab somebody with it, and the guy moves out of the way right at the last second. But my God, I've watched that 40 times. Probably more than that. It's amazing to see that come back again. It's been a fun week of wrestling, and I didn't see something I alluded to earlier. I didn't see, I said I was going to ignore it. Maybe that's part of it. I didn't see too many people crapping on wrestling just to crap on it. Everybody was having a good time tonight. Most people are having a good time, which is the point, Craig.
That is the point of wrestling. And I didn't even hear, we even had, this is a big week in wrestling, Dan, where Hulk Hogan came back and it barely made a ripple.
Nobody cares. And
Exactly.
That's the way it should be at this point. Sorry. Not really, though. I'm actually not sorry. But with that being said, Craig, I think it's time to tip the hat and say good evening. Say good evening, everybody. Craig, where can the people follow you online?
They can follow me online on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter at Craig Ligons, CraigLiggeons. If you like that comic book stuff, you can join me in my other podcast, Comic Book Gurus Podcast. That's available on WMR.com, on iTunes, Google Play, and wherever podcasts are sold for free.
Sold for free. The HIAC Talk Radio Network. Again, I heard a rumor that the website will be coming back this week. I have been told that in the next 7 to 10 days, HIACTalkRadio.com will be back. And that means the iTunes, Apple Podcasts. That means Google Podcasts, Stitcher, everywhere else that you listen to the feed. Stadium Journey, Obey the Puck, and HIAC Talk Radio will be back. And that's a lot of backlogging I've got to do. That's mostly the reason I was like, please get the website back up, because I have a lot of posts to put back up. It's a couple months. So I'm going to be working. I won't be working hard this weekend because I'll be in New York to see Phil Collins. And as I told Harry, Phil Collins takes precedent over everybody, and that's including my family. So, and they understand that, and that's the way it is. So, since Amber's falling asleep, I've given you all the information that I need to give you. In the meantime, we will always be, but in the meantime, the main place to see is where we usually simulcast HIAC Talk Radio on the VOC Nation Radio Network. Go to Apple Podcasts or Blog Talk Radio, type in VOC Nation Radio, or go to thebradyhicks.com, click on other programs and look for HIAC Talk Radio and Stadium Journey and Obey the Puck to listen to our archive until our site is back up. All social media platforms, HIAC Talk Radio. I am the above average comedian Dan Collins. You go follow me on Twitter at DanLaw83 for Craig Legons. I am who I said I just was. We'll see you next time. Have a good one, everybody.